In the quiet city of Willow Creek, life seems ordinary until one stormy evening changes everything for Nathaniel Parker, a reserved businessman who has spent years feeling like something in his life is missing. On a rain-soaked street, he spots a small, shivering girl named Lily, clutching her baby brother Ethan, abandoned and alone. Driven by an unexplainable pull, Nathaniel makes a decision that will turn his world upside down. But the road to healing is not simple. As Nathaniel uncovers the truth about where Lily and Ethan came from, he is thrust into a dangerous fight against the very institution meant to protect them, a corrupt orphanage hiding sinister secrets. With the help of a brave whistleblower and his loyal friend, Chief Thomas Gray, Nathaniel takes on powerful forces determined to silence anyone who gets in their way. As bonds are formed and broken, Nathaniel must confront his own fears and discover the depths of his courage. Can one man's determination be enough to protect two innocent children and bring justice to the countless lives impacted by greed and cruelty? The streets of San Diego shimmered under the soft glow of streetlights as raindrops pelted the windows and turned the sidewalks into streams. The storm had rolled in suddenly, wrapping the city in a cold, relentless downpour. Most people had fled for cover, the sound of their hurried footsteps swallowed by the rain. Nathaniel Parker tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his old Range Rover as the rain battered the windshield. The wipers struggled to keep up, blurring his view of the narrow streets lined with closed cafes and shops. Nathaniel was a man many respected. At 55, he had built a name for himself in real estate. Yet, beneath his polished exterior lay an emptiness he could not shake. The days felt the same: business meetings, deals, a quiet dinner alone in his spacious but hollow house. His home, though luxurious, felt like a museum, filled with everything he thought he needed, but devoid of warmth. As he drove through the rain-soaked streets, his mind wandered. He thought about the countless milestones he had reached, and how, despite everything, he felt as if something vital was missing. What was it? He did not have an answer, only the gnawing certainty that his life had become more routine than meaningful. Suddenly, the traffic light ahead turned red, forcing him to an abrupt stop. As his car idled, he noticed a shadow near the bookstore on the corner. At first, he thought it was a stray dog or a pile of discarded belongings, but as he peered closer, the shadow shifted. Nathaniel's heart gave a small jolt as he realized it was a child, a young girl, no older than 7, huddled against the wall, drenched from head to toe. In her arms, she held a small bundle, wrapped tightly in a frayed blanket. Without thinking, Nathaniel pulled his car to the curb and switched off the engine. The rain hit his face like ice as he stepped out, but he barely noticed. His gaze remained fixed on the girl. "Hey," he called gently, careful not to startle her. "Are you okay?" The girl's head lifted slowly. Her face was pale, her brown hair matted to her forehead. Her large eyes, full of fear and exhaustion, met his. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. She was not just wet, she was terrified. He knelt down to her level, keeping his voice soft. "What are you doing out here all alone?" She tightened her hold on the bundle in her arms. I have nowhere to go," she whispered. Her voice was so quiet, Nathaniel had to lean in to hear. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily," she replied. Nathaniel nodded, his eyes dropping to the bundle. "And this?" "My brother, Ethan," she said, her lips trembling as if saying his name caused her pain. "He's only a baby." Nathaniel felt a pang in his chest. He knew what it was, an unbearable sadness mixed with a protective urge that surprised him with its intensity. "Where are your parents?" he asked. Lily's gaze fell to the ground. "They left us," she whispered. "The woman from the orphanage? She said she could not keep us. She said we were too much trouble." Nathaniel's heart twisted. 1,000 questions swirled in his mind, but he pushed them aside. The only thing that mattered now was getting these children somewhere safe. He reached out his hand. "Come with me. It's warm in the car. I will take you somewhere safe. I promise." Lily hesitated. Her eyes searched his face, wary but desperate. Finally, after what felt like forever, she reached out and placed her small hand in his. "Okay," she whispered. Nathaniel gently guided her to the car, opened the door, and helped her inside. He adjusted the heater and handed her a spare blanket from the back seat. As the rain pounded on the roof, Nathaniel glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was cradling Ethan, who let out a faint whimper, his tiny face scrunched from cold or hunger. "Do you like hot chocolate?" Nathaniel asked, trying to make her feel at ease. Lily gave a small nod. "Good," he said, as he pulled onto the road. "There is a cafe just a few streets away. We will warm up there." The drive was short, but felt heavy with unspoken words. Nathaniel's mind raced as he thought about the orphanage Lily had mentioned. What kind of place would leave two children out in the rain like this? Moments later, they arrived at a small corner cafe with soft yellow lights glowing through fogged-up windows. Nathaniel parked and grabbed an umbrella from the trunk. He opened the door and offered Lily a hand. "Let's get you inside," he said. They hurried under the umbrella, though it did little to shield them from the storm. The cafe's doorbell chimed as they entered, and a wave of warmth enveloped them. The aroma of fresh bread and roasted coffee filled the air. Behind the counter, Mrs. Bailey, the cafe owner, looked up and gasped. "Nathaniel, what on earth?" He offered her a tired smile as he guided Lily to a seat near the fireplace. "It is a long story," he said, "but I could use some help. Could you bring something warm for them? Maybe a towel?" Mrs. Bailey nodded, her concern etched across her face. "Of course." Minutes later, she returned with 2 mugs of hot chocolate and a soft towel. Nathaniel wrapped Ethan snugly and handed Lily a mug. She took it with both hands and held it close, savoring the warmth. "You are safe now," Nathaniel assured her. For the first time, Lily's tense shoulders began to relax. As she sipped, a faint flicker of trust appeared in her eyes. Nathaniel leaned back, his heart heavy but resolute. He did not know where this path would lead, but one thing was clear: he could not walk away. The fire crackled softly, its golden glow casting a warm light over the cozy cafe. Outside, the rain continued to fall in heavy sheets, but inside, there was an unexpected sense of calm. Nathaniel watched as Lily sat by the fire, holding the mug of hot chocolate with both hands. Her small frame still trembled slightly, but the warmth seemed to seep into her at last. Mrs. Bailey placed a plate of cookies on the table and gave Nathaniel a curious look as she handed him a fresh towel. "Nathaniel," she began gently, "what happened? Who are these children?" Nathaniel ran a hand through his damp hair and sighed. "I found them outside, alone in the storm. She said they were left by someone from the orphanage." Mrs. Bailey's face softened with shock and sympathy. "Good Lord! Poor things." She knelt beside Lily, her voice as soft as a lullaby. "Sweetheart, you can eat as many cookies as you like. They are fresh out of the oven." Lily glanced up, uncertain. Her brown eyes flickered between Nathaniel and Mrs. Bailey. Slowly, she reached for a cookie, nibbling at the edge as if she was unsure if it was really hers to take. Nathaniel sat across from her and spoke gently. "Lily, can you tell me more about the orphanage? I want to help you and Ethan." Lily hesitated, her small fingers crumbling the cookie between her hands. "The orphanage is called Willow Creek House," she whispered at last. "We lived there since I was 5. But Ms. Victoria, she runs the place. She never liked me or Ethan." Nathaniel felt a surge of anger, but he kept his expression calm. "Why do you think that?" Lily's voice grew quieter. "Because Ethan cries a lot. He's just a baby, and he gets hungry. But they never gave us enough food. Ms. Victoria, she said we were too much trouble. Yesterday, she got so mad. She took us in her car and left us in the city." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. How could someone be so heartless? Did she tell anyone she was leaving you? Lily shook her head. She told me no one would care if we were gone. Her voice broke, and tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand, determined not to cry. Mrs. Bailey let out a soft gasp. Nathaniel felt his heart squeeze painfully. He reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. "Lily," he said with quiet certainty, "she was wrong. You and Ethan matter, and you are safe now." Lily stared at his hand for a long moment before nodding, though her expression was still clouded with fear. Nathaniel's thoughts raced. Willow Creek House. He had passed by the building before, but had never paid it much attention. It looked like any other children's home. But Lily's story hinted at something far darker. "Mrs. Bailey," he said softly, "do you mind watching Lily and Ethan for a few minutes? I need to make a phone call." Mrs. Bailey gave him a reassuring nod. "Of course. Take your time." Nathaniel stepped outside, ignoring the rain as he pulled out his phone and dialed the number of an old friend, Thomas Gray, a trusted police chief who had spent years fighting for justice in the city. "Thomas, it is Nathaniel Parker. I need your help," Nathaniel began, his voice steady but heavy with urgency. Thomas's familiar voice answered, calm but curious. "Nathaniel? What is going on?" Nathaniel took a breath and explained everything, finding Lily and Ethan, the orphanage, and what the children had endured. There was a long pause before Thomas spoke again. "I have heard rumors about Willow Creek House, but nothing concrete. If what Lily says is true, we need to look into this. I will send someone to check the orphanage's records and see if there are any complaints on file. But Nathaniel, are the children safe with you for now?" "Yes," Nathaniel replied. "They are with me. I will not let anything happen to them." "Good. I trust you," Thomas said. "I will be in touch as soon as I know more." Nathaniel thanked him and ended the call. He stayed outside for a moment, staring out into the rain. The world felt heavier, as though the storm around him mirrored the gravity of the situation. When he stepped back inside, Lily was sitting on the couch near the fireplace, gently rocking Ethan in her arms. Mrs. Bailey had given her a soft blanket, and though Lily's face still held traces of fear, there was something different, something quieter. Nathaniel sat beside her. "Lily," he began gently, "I spoke with someone who can help. His name is Chief Gray. He is very kind and very good at what he does. He will look into Willow Creek House, but for now, you and Ethan are going to stay with me." Lily's eyes widened. "With you?" Nathaniel nodded. "Yes, I have a home with extra rooms and lots of space. It is warm and safe, and I want you to feel comfortable there." For a moment, Lily was silent, as though trying to decide if she could believe him. Then she whispered, "Okay." Nathaniel exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. "We will take it one day at a time," he said, standing and holding out his hand. "Ready to head home?" Lily stood, still cradling Ethan. She looked small but determined as she nodded. "Yes." Mrs. Bailey walked them to the door. "Nathaniel, if you need anything at all, food, clothes for the children, you let me know," she said firmly. Nathaniel smiled at her kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Bailey. I will." With the rain easing into a soft drizzle, Nathaniel led the children back to the car. As they drove toward his home, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Lily watching the world pass by, her expression unreadable. When they arrived, Nathaniel parked in front of his two-story house. The lights inside glowed warmly against the dim sky. He opened the door and stepped aside to let them in. Lily hesitated on the threshold, as though unsure she belonged. Nathaniel gave her a reassuring smile. "Welcome home," he said softly. Slowly, Lily stepped inside, holding Ethan close. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a glimmer of something unfamiliar hope. Nathaniel closed the front door behind them, and set his keys on the small entryway table. His house was quiet and warm, filled with soft light from the floor lamps he had turned on earlier. The gentle hum of the heater filled the silence as the scent of cedar lingered in the air. Lily stood near the doorway, clutching Ethan tightly as she took in her surroundings. The living room was spacious but cozy, with a large sofa and a bookshelf filled with worn novels and framed pictures of city landscapes. A thick, woven rug covered the wooden floor. Nathaniel noticed how Lily's eyes flickered with uncertainty. She kept glancing at Ethan, as if unsure whether this strange, beautiful house could really be a safe place for them. "You can sit anywhere you like," Nathaniel said, keeping his tone soft. He took off his coat and hung it by the door before walking to the kitchen. "Are you hungry? I can make something simple, toast maybe, or some soup." Lily hesitated before answering. "Toast, please." Nathaniel smiled, coming right up. As he busied himself in the kitchen, he heard the soft creak of the couch as Lily finally sat down. He peeked around the corner and saw her gently rocking Ethan, humming softly to calm him. The sight tugged at his heart. She was just a child herself, yet she had taken on so much responsibility. In minutes, Nathaniel returned with a tray holding 2 plates of buttered toast and a glass of water. He set it down on the coffee table. Lily whispered a quiet "thank you" and reached for a slice. Ethan whimpered in her arms, his small face pale but peaceful. Nathaniel sat in the armchair across from them. "Lily," he began gently, "can you tell me more about Miss Victoria? About Willow Creek House?" Lily's chewing slowed. She swallowed and set the toast down, wrapping her arms protectively around Ethan. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly, careful not to press her too hard. "You do not have to tell me if it makes you sad. I just want to understand." Lily's eyes flickered with fear, but after a long silence, she spoke. "There were a lot of kids at the orphanage. At first, I thought it was okay, but it was not. Miss Victoria, she was mean. She would yell if we made too much noise or asked for more food. She would lock us in our rooms sometimes." Nathaniel's stomach tightened. "Did anyone ever check on the orphanage? Did anyone ever visit?" Lily shook her head. "There was a man. He came once to ask questions. I do not know his name. But after he came, Miss Victoria got really angry. She said no one would believe us. Then some kids started disappearing." Nathaniel's breath caught in his chest. "Disappearing?" Lily nodded, her eyes fixed on a spot on the floor. "Miss Victoria said they got adopted, but I never believed her. They never came back to say goodbye." Nathaniel leaned back, absorbing her words. A chill crept over him, despite the warmth of the room. Something was very wrong with Willow Creek House, far worse than he had imagined. "Did anyone ever try to stop her?" Nathaniel asked softly. Lily hesitated, then nodded. "Mr. Jeffrey. He used to work there. He was nice. He gave us extra food sometimes when no one was looking. But then one day, he disappeared too." Nathaniel felt anger simmer beneath the surface. He needed to know who this Jeffrey was and what had happened to him. If this man had tried to help the children, he might hold the key to uncovering the truth. Nathaniel took a steadying breath and offered Lily a reassuring smile. "Thank you for telling me. You were very brave, Lily. I know that was not easy." She gave a small nod, though her shoulders remained tense. Nathaniel stood and walked to the window, staring out at the rain that still fell in a soft drizzle. The streetlights cast long, watery reflections across the road. He pulled out his phone and dialed Thomas Gray again. Thomas answered on the first ring. "Nathaniel?" Nathaniel wasted no time. "Thomas, I need you to look up a name. Jeffrey. I do not know his last name, but Lily says he worked at Willow Creek House and tried to help the children. Then he vanished." There was a pause before Thomas responded. "I will look into it. But Nathaniel, be careful. If what Lily is saying is true, there could be powerful people involved. This might go deeper than just one woman running an orphanage." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. I understand, but I am not backing down. Thomas's voice softened. I know you are not. I will call you back as soon as I have something. Nathaniel ended the call and returned to the living room. Lily had finished her toast and was now gently patting Ethan's back as he slept. Would you like to see your room? Nathaniel asked, keeping his tone light. I set up a room upstairs with a bed and some blankets. You and Ethan can stay there as long as you need. Lily hesitated but nodded. Okay. Nathaniel led her upstairs to a simple but comfortable guest room. There was a twin bed with a patchwork quilt and a crib that Nathaniel had borrowed from a neighbor. A small lamp on the nightstand cast a soft glow. Lily gently laid Ethan in the crib, tucking the blanket around him. She watched him for a moment, then turned to Nathaniel. Thank you for helping us. Nathaniel's chest felt tight, but he managed a small smile. You do not need to thank me. You deserve to be safe, Lily. Both of you. Lily's gaze held his for a long moment before she nodded and climbed onto the bed. Within minutes, she was asleep, her small frame curled under the quilt. Nathaniel stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. The house, usually so quiet and lonely, now felt different, full of purpose. As he closed the door and walked back downstairs, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Whatever darkness was hiding behind the walls of Willow Creek House, he would uncover it, and he would do whatever it took to keep Lily and Ethan safe. Morning arrived slowly, the sky still veiled in soft gray as the rain tapered off. Nathaniel stood by the kitchen window, a mug of coffee warming his hands as he watched the drizzle. His house was still except for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards and the quiet ticking of the clock. He had hardly slept. The weight of Lily's story pressed on him like a heavy stone. The image of her small, frightened face lingered in his mind. Somewhere out there was a woman who had cast two innocent children aside as though they were nothing. And if Lily's story was true, other children could be in danger too. Nathaniel's phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the silence. He grabbed it, recognizing Thomas Gray's name on the screen. Nathaniel. Thomas's voice came through, calm, but with an edge of concern. I found the man you asked about, Jeffrey Sanders. He used to be a caretaker at Willow Creek House for about 3 years. He filed a report against Ms. Victoria Rhodes nearly 2 years ago, but it never went anywhere. The next month, he was fired. He left town soon after that. Nathaniel's grip tightened on the phone. Is there any way to reach him? Thomas hesitated. It was hard to track him down. He is living in a small village, about an hour outside of the city. I have his address. I can send it to you. But, Nathaniel, if you visit him, you need to be careful. This situation is already raising questions. I understand, Nathaniel replied, but I need to hear what he knows. He may be the only one who can shed light on what happened at that orphanage. After hanging up, Nathaniel leaned against the counter, gathering his thoughts. He knew this was not just a small-town problem. It was bigger. And with every step he took, he felt himself moving further into something dangerous. The soft patter of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, still in the oversized sweater he had given her the night before. Her hair was messy, and her eyes were puffy from sleep, but she looked more at ease. Good morning, Nathaniel said gently. Are you hungry? Lily nodded shyly. Nathaniel set the coffee mug aside and started preparing breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and some fruit. As he worked, he glanced at her. She was standing near the kitchen table, watching him cautiously but curiously. You know, Nathaniel said, his voice light, I am not much of a cook, but breakfast is the one thing I can make without burning the house down. A small smile tugged at the corner of Lily's lips. Moments later, they sat together at the table, and Lily picked at her food quietly. Nathaniel wanted to give her time to eat, but felt the need to reassure her. Lily, he said softly, I am going to make sure everything is okay. I spoke with a friend of mine. He is helping me learn more about Willow Creek House and Miss Victoria. Lily's fork paused mid-air. She lowered it slowly and whispered, "Is she going to find us?" Nathaniel's heart sank at the fear in her voice. He reached across the table and placed a steady hand over hers. "No, Lily, she will not find you. You and Ethan are safe here. I promise." Lily's eyes searched his face, and after a moment, she nodded, though her expression still held traces of worry. Later that morning, after making sure Mrs. Bailey would check in on the children, Nathaniel grabbed his jacket and keys. "I need to run an errand," he told Lily. "Mrs. Bailey will stay with you while I am gone." Lily nodded, hugging Ethan close. Nathaniel crouched down and gave her a reassuring smile. "I will be back soon. And remember, you are safe." He stepped outside and climbed into his car, his thoughts swirling as he drove through the winding roads that led away from the city. The houses became sparser, giving way to fields and open land. The sky was still overcast, the air crisp with the scent of wet earth. After nearly an hour, he reached the small village Thomas had mentioned. The place felt removed from the world, a quiet, rustic settlement with dirt paths and modest homes. Nathaniel double-checked the address and parked outside a small house with peeling paint and a porch shaded by a weathered awning. He stepped out and approached the door, knocking lightly. There was a long silence before cautious footsteps approached. The door creaked open just enough for Nathaniel to see a man with disheveled hair and tired eyes. His face was lined with worry, and his gaze was wary. "Jeffrey Sanders?" Nathaniel asked. The man hesitated before nodding. "Who are you?" "My name is Nathaniel Parker. I need to talk to you about Willow Creek House and Ms. Victoria." At the mention of her name, Jeffrey's expression darkened. He opened the door wider, but glanced behind Nathaniel as though checking for anyone who might be watching. "Come in." The house was small and sparsely furnished, but clean. Jeffrey gestured for Nathaniel to sit at the small kitchen table. Nathaniel took a seat and spoke calmly. "I know about Lily and Ethan. I know what happened to them. And I know you tried to help." Jeffrey's shoulders sagged, as if the weight of the past had caught up with him all at once. "They should not have been left out there," he muttered. "None of them should have." Nathaniel's heart tightened. "How many children, Jeffrey? How many disappeared?" Jeffrey ran a hand over his face and took a shaky breath. "Too many. They called it adoption. But it was not right. The paperwork was fake. Some of those kids, they just vanished. When I started asking questions, I was fired. And after that, the threats started." Nathaniel leaned forward. "Jeffrey, I need your help. I want to make sure this stops, but I cannot do it without you. Please." Jeffrey's eyes met Nathaniel's, filled with fear, but also something else, reluctant hope. "You do not know what you are up against," Jeffrey whispered. "I know enough," Nathaniel said firmly, "but I will not walk away. Not from Lily and Ethan, not from the others." For a long moment, Jeffrey said nothing. Then, finally, he nodded. "I will tell you everything I know, but you need to be careful. Victoria, she has people protecting her." Nathaniel nodded, a sense of resolve settling over him. He knew this would be dangerous, but if even one more child could be saved, it would be worth the risk. The air in Jeffrey Sanders' small kitchen was thick with tension. Nathaniel sat at the table, leaning forward as Jeffrey fidgeted nervously. His hands trembled as he rubbed them together, his gaze darting to the windows, as though expecting someone to burst through at any moment. Jeffrey took a deep breath and spoke slowly. "It started a few years after Ms. Eleanor Hayes died. She was the founder. She cared about those kids. When she passed away, everything changed. Victoria Rhodes took over, and everything became darker." Nathaniel listened intently. He could hear the strain in Jeffrey's voice, the weight of the memories he carried. "At first it was small things," Jeffrey continued. "Cutbacks on food, fewer staff, stricter rules, but then kids started disappearing. Victoria said they were being adopted, but the adoptions happened so fast, and the same man kept showing up to process the papers, a lawyer from out of town. No one ever questioned it, at least no one who mattered. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "And you did?" Jeffrey nodded, his eyes clouded with guilt. "I asked questions. I spoke to the staff, the social workers. I even went to the city office to check the records. Nothing added up. There were no follow-ups, no background checks on the people who supposedly took the kids. When I tried to file an official report, Victoria found out. She called me into her office and she said I was digging a grave for myself." Nathaniel felt a chill creep down his spine. "Did you report her after that?" Jeffrey shook his head, shame flickering in his eyes. "I was scared. The next day I was fired. And then, strange things started happening. I found my tires slashed, letters left at my door, threats. So I ran. I left the city, hoping they would forget about me." He paused, his voice low and thick. "But I have never forgotten about those kids. I still see their faces." Nathaniel leaned forward, his voice steady. "You did not fail them, Jeffrey. You tried to help, and now you can help again." Jeffrey met Nathaniel's gaze, a mix of fear and reluctant courage in his eyes. "What do you need me to do?" Nathaniel exhaled slowly, grateful that Jeffrey was willing to trust him. "Tell everything you just told me to Chief Gray. He is someone we can trust. With your testimony, we can build a case strong enough to take Victoria down." Jeffrey hesitated, glancing at the window again. "You are sure he is trustworthy?" Nathaniel nodded. "I have known Thomas Gray for years. He has dedicated his life to justice. He will protect you." Jeffrey's shoulders slumped, as though releasing years of tension. "All right, I will do it. But we need to be smart about this." Nathaniel stood and placed a reassuring hand on Jeffrey's shoulder. "We will be. You are not alone anymore." The drive back to San Diego felt longer than it should have. The sky remained overcast, casting a dull light over the city as Nathaniel navigated the winding roads. His mind churned with everything Jeffrey had told him. The stories of children disappearing, the falsified records. It was worse than he had imagined. When he finally pulled into his driveway, he took a moment to steady himself before heading inside. The familiar warmth of the house greeted him, along with the soft hum of the heater. Mrs. Bailey was seated on the couch, reading a storybook to Lily, who was curled up with Ethan in her arms. The sight of them brought a brief wave of calm over Nathaniel's heart. Mrs. Bailey looked up as he entered, closing the book. "You are back. How did it go?" Nathaniel gave her a small nod. "It went well. I found Jeffrey. He is going to help us." Lily's head perked up at the mention of the name. "Mr. Jeffrey?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel walked over and crouched down beside the couch. "Yes, Lily. He remembers you and Ethan. He is safe, and he is going to help us stop Miss Victoria." Lily's wide eyes searched his face. "Are you sure?" Nathaniel smiled gently. "I promise. We are going to make sure she can never hurt anyone again." Lily's gaze softened, and after a moment, she nodded, though Nathaniel could still see the lingering fear behind her quiet acceptance. Later that night, after Mrs. Bailey had left and the children were asleep, Nathaniel sat at the dining table, his phone in hand. He dialed Thomas Gray and waited. Thomas answered quickly. "Nathaniel, what do you have for me?" "I spoke with Jeffrey," Nathaniel began. "Everything Lily said is true. He confirmed it. Fake adoption papers, missing children, threats. He is willing to testify." There was a brief silence on the other end before Thomas responded, his tone measured but urgent. "That is good news, but Nathaniel, you need to be careful. Victoria Rhodes has connections. If she gets wind of this, she could try to cover her tracks or worse." "I understand," Nathaniel replied, his voice calm but resolute. "But I will not back down." Thomas's voice softened. Neither will I. I will organize a meeting with Jeffrey as soon as possible. We will need to move quickly and quietly. Thank you, Thomas, Nathaniel said sincerely. As he hung up, Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, exhaustion finally settling in. The house was quiet, except for the faint sound of rain starting again outside. He glanced toward the hallway where Lily and Ethan slept. He thought about how easily he could have ignored that shadow in the rain, how different their lives would be if he had kept driving. But he hadn't. Something had told him to stop, and now he was standing in the middle of something bigger than he had ever anticipated. But for the first time in years, he felt certain he was exactly where he needed to be. The next morning, Nathaniel awoke early to the sound of soft footsteps. He opened his eyes to see Lily standing at the edge of the hallway, her hair tousled from sleep. "Good morning," he greeted her with a smile. Lily shifted slightly. "Is Mr. Jeffrey okay?" Nathaniel nodded. "Yes, he is okay, and we are going to see him soon, but you do not need to worry about that. Your only job right now is to rest and feel safe." Lily's small shoulders relaxed, and she walked over to the kitchen table where Nathaniel was pouring himself a cup of coffee. She stared at the mug for a moment, then looked up at him. "Why are you helping us?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Nathaniel paused, the warmth of the cup spreading through his hands. He looked at Lily, this small, resilient girl who had endured so much. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because you deserve to be cared for, just like anyone else." Lily's eyes glistened for a moment before she nodded. She reached for a piece of toast Nathaniel had made and took a small bite. For the first time, Nathaniel noticed something new, a hint of trust beginning to bloom. And that small spark of trust strengthened his resolve even more. The morning unfolded quietly. Nathaniel watched as Lily and Ethan finished their breakfast. Ethan sat on Lily's lap, chewing on a soft piece of toast while she kept one arm protectively wrapped around him. It amazed Nathaniel how instinctively she cared for her brother, even though she was still a child herself. After cleaning up the table, Nathaniel knew there was no time to waste. He had a long day ahead. He needed to make sure Jeffrey's testimony reached the right people before Victoria had a chance to cover her tracks. "Lily," he said gently, "I need to go meet with my friend, Chief Gray. He is helping us stop Ms. Victoria. While I am gone, Mrs. Bailey will stay with you and Ethan. She is coming over soon." Lily's face shifted with worry. "Will you come back?" Nathaniel knelt beside her, meeting her eyes. "I will always come back," he said, his voice steady. "No one will take you or Ethan away. I promise." Lily nodded slowly, but still hugged Ethan tighter. Nathaniel stood as the doorbell rang. He opened it to find Mrs. Bailey standing on the porch, holding a small bag of groceries. "Morning, Nathaniel," she greeted with a warm smile before stepping inside. She crouched down to greet Lily. "I brought some apples and juice for you and Ethan. What do you say we read another story later?" Lily's expression softened as she nodded. Nathaniel gave Mrs. Bailey an appreciative look. "Thank you again, Bailey. I will try not to be too long." "Take your time," she assured him. "We will be fine." Nathaniel grabbed his jacket and keys, gave Lily one more reassuring glance, and stepped outside. The drive to the police station was tense. Nathaniel's thoughts swirled with everything Jeffrey had told him. Victoria Rhodes was not just cruel, she was methodical. She had turned Willow Creek House into a front for something far more sinister, using fake adoption papers to hide her actions. When Nathaniel arrived at the station, Chief Thomas Gray was already waiting for him. Dressed in his uniform, Thomas stood with a clipboard in hand, surrounded by a small group of trusted officers. His sharp eyes lit up when he saw Nathaniel step out of the car. "Nathaniel," Thomas greeted, extending a firm hand. "You are just in time. We have a lot to go over." Nathaniel followed Thomas inside the station and into a private meeting room. The walls were lined with whiteboards filled with timelines, photographs, and notes about the orphanage. It was clear that Thomas had taken this case seriously. Jeffrey agreed to testify, Nathaniel began, as he took a seat. But he is still scared. He knows how powerful Victoria is. Thomas nodded, his face grim. That is understandable. Victoria Rhodes has more connections than I care to admit. Politicians? Business owners? She has kept herself insulated for years. But with Jeffrey's statement, we have a solid start. Nathaniel glanced at the whiteboard. What is the plan? Thomas leaned forward, pointing to a section of the board. First, we need to document Jeffrey's testimony. I will meet with him personally and record everything he knows. Second, we will need a warrant to search Willow Creek House. If what Jeffrey says is true, there may still be evidence inside financial records, falsified adoption papers, maybe even proof of where the missing children were taken. Nathaniel listened carefully. And the children who are still there? What happens to them? Thomas's expression softened. We will remove them immediately and make sure they are placed somewhere safe. I will call in social workers who can help. Nathaniel exhaled, relieved that there was a clear plan in place. But he knew how fragile this process could be. What about Victoria? Does she know we are investigating? Thomas's jaw tightened. Not yet, as far as we know. But the moment we move in, she will know. We need to act fast and stay quiet until we have enough to arrest her. Nathaniel nodded. I will make sure Jeffrey is ready. He wants to help, but he has been through a lot. Thomas placed a reassuring hand on Nathaniel's shoulder. We will protect him, I promise. Later that afternoon, Nathaniel returned home, feeling both anxious and determined. As he stepped inside, he was greeted by the familiar sound of laughter, soft and unexpected. He followed the sound into the living room, where Mrs. Bailey was seated on the floor with Lily, reading from a book. Ethan giggled as he reached for the colorful pages. Nathaniel paused, taking in the scene. For a brief moment, his home felt normal. Mrs. Bailey looked up and smiled. Welcome back. How did it go? Nathaniel gave a small nod as he sat down on the couch. It went well. We have a plan. Thomas is gathering everything we need to move forward. Lily looked up from the storybook, her expression cautious. Are they going to stop her? Nathaniel met her gaze and spoke with quiet certainty. Yes, Lily, we are going to stop her, and no one else will be left behind. Lily held his gaze for a moment before nodding. Slowly, the tension in her small frame eased. That evening, after Mrs. Bailey left, Nathaniel prepared a simple dinner pasta and fresh bread. As they ate, he asked Lily questions about her favorite things. It was a way to keep things light, to remind her that she was safe. What is your favorite color? Nathaniel asked with a smile. Lily tilted her head, considering. Blue, like the sky on sunny days. Nathaniel nodded. That is a good choice. What about you? Lily asked, surprising him with her own question. Nathaniel chuckled softly. I think green, like the trees in the park after it rains. Lily gave a small smile, her eyes softening. She had not asked anyone a question in a long time. After dinner, Nathaniel helped her tuck Ethan into the crib upstairs. Lily pulled the quilt over herself and glanced at Nathaniel as he turned off the lamp, leaving only the soft glow of the nightlight. Good night, Mr. Nathaniel, she whispered. Good night, Lily, he replied gently. Sleep well. In the quiet of his study, Nathaniel sat at his desk, reviewing everything he had learned. Jeffrey's testimony was the missing piece that could finally bring Victoria down, but with every step forward, Nathaniel knew the risk increased. He glanced at the framed photograph on his desk, a simple image of a quiet beach at sunset. It reminded him why he had chosen to step into this fight. His life had felt empty for so long, but now, with Lily and Ethan under his care, everything had changed. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, and he would not stop until justice was served. The morning dawned crisp and clear, with soft sunlight filtering through the windows. It was a sharp contrast to the storm that had brought Lily and Ethan into Nathaniel's life. The sky seemed calm, but Nathaniel knew it was the calm before something much bigger. He poured himself a cup of coffee and took a steadying breath. Today was the day. Thomas had called him late the night before the search warrant had been approved. The team was ready to move in on Willow Creek House. Nathaniel's heart felt heavy as he stared into his coffee. The plan was in place, but there were so many unknowns. Would they find the proof they needed? What if Victoria somehow escaped? He shook the thought away and reminded himself that he was not alone in this fight. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Nathaniel?" He turned to see Lily standing in the hallway, rubbing her eyes sleepily. She was still small in the oversized sweater, and her hair was tousled. "Good morning, Lily," he said gently, setting his mug down. "Did you sleep well?" Lily nodded as she padded over to the kitchen table. Is today the day?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel knelt down so they were eye level. "Yes, it is. But I need you to know something. You and Ethan are safe, no matter what. I will make sure of that." Lily's brow furrowed. "Will they believe Mr. Jeffrey?" Nathaniel reached for her hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. "Yes, they will. And once they see the truth, Ms. Victoria will not be able to hurt anyone ever again." Lily searched his face, as though looking for any sign of doubt. When she found none, she nodded slowly. A few hours later, Nathaniel arrived at the police station, his heart pounding in his chest. Thomas Gray was waiting with his team, a group of officers hand-picked for their integrity and skill. They stood in a semicircle, their expressions serious. Thomas gestured for Nathaniel to join them. "All right, everyone, here is the plan," Thomas began, pointing to a map pinned to the wall. "We have confirmed that Victoria Rhodes is at Willow Creek House. Our goal is to secure the building, rescue the children, and gather any evidence we can find. We move in quickly and carefully. Our first priority is their safety." The officers nodded in unison. Nathaniel's stomach tightened as he studied the layout of the orphanage. He could picture Lily and Ethan wandering those hallways, scared and hungry. Thomas glanced at Nathaniel. "You do not have to come, you know. You have done enough." Nathaniel shook his head. "No, I need to see this through." Thomas gave a small nod, understanding. "Then stay close and follow my lead." The caravan of unmarked police vehicles moved through the city quietly, their lights off to avoid attention. Nathaniel sat in the passenger seat of Thomas's car, the air thick with anticipation. As they approached Willow Creek House, Nathaniel felt a chill run down his spine. The building loomed ahead, an old gray structure with peeling paint and boarded windows. From the outside, it looked like it had been abandoned long ago, but inside he knew there were children who needed saving. Thomas spoke into the radio, his voice calm but firm. "All units in position. On my count. 3, 2, 1. Go!" The cars stopped in front of the building, and officers poured out, surrounding the entrance. 2 officers pried the front door open, and the team moved inside with swift precision. Nathaniel followed closely behind Thomas, his heart thundering in his chest. The interior was as grim as he expected. The walls were bare and stained, and the air smelled damp and stale. "Room 1, clear," one officer called out. "Room 2, clear." The team advanced down the hallways, checking each room as they went. Nathaniel's breath caught as they reached the main common area. There they were, children of all ages, sitting quietly on small cots and benches. Their eyes widened as the officers entered. Some looked frightened, while others seemed dazed, as though they had forgotten how to hope. Thomas stepped forward, his voice kind but authoritative. "It is okay. You are safe now. We are here to help you." The children glanced at one another, unsure. Nathaniel took a step forward and crouched down, meeting the eyes of a young boy who clutched a worn-out blanket. "It is really okay," Nathaniel said softly. "No one is going to hurt you." Slowly, the boy released the blanket and nodded. The other children began to stir, some standing up and reaching for the officer's hands. Nathaniel's heart clenched as he looked at their thin faces and fragile frames. How long had they been waiting for someone to care? "Get the social workers in here," Thomas ordered. "We need to get the kids to a safe location." Nathaniel watched as the officers gently led the children out in small groups. Relief washed over him, but it was quickly followed by another wave of tension. Victoria Rhodes had not yet been found. As they moved upstairs, Nathaniel heard a door slam. Thomas raised his hand, signaling the team to pause. They followed the sound to the end of the hallway, where a door was ajar. Thomas pushed it open, and there she was, Victoria Rhodes. She stood behind a desk, her face pale but composed. She looked exactly as Lily had described, tall, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. "You have no right to be here," she said, her voice low and venomous. Thomas stepped forward. "Victoria Rhodes, you are under arrest for child endangerment, fraud, and illegal adoption practices. It is over." Victoria's gaze flickered with something like fear, but she quickly masked it with a thin smile. "You think you are saving them? You have no idea how the world works. You are nothing more than pawns in a game that is bigger than you." Nathaniel felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. "They are not pawns. They are children. And you do not get to decide their worth." Victoria's mask of composure cracked for a brief second, before two officers moved forward and placed handcuffs on her wrists. As they led her out of the room, Nathaniel felt a strange stillness settle over him. The nightmare was finally ending. Thomas turned to Nathaniel, his expression somber but satisfied. "We did it." Nathaniel nodded, though the weight of everything that had happened still lingered. "We saved them," he whispered. Outside, the children were being loaded into vans that would take them to a safe shelter. Nathaniel scanned the group and saw their faces no longer hollow, but filled with cautious hope. As he watched them leave, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Thomas. "You did a good thing today, Nathaniel." Nathaniel exhaled slowly, a small, weary smile forming. "We did." And for the first time in years, he felt like the emptiness in his life was being replaced by something far more meaningful. The sun was setting by the time Nathaniel arrived home. The sky was painted in hues of orange and gold, casting a peaceful glow over the quiet street. But despite the beauty of the evening, Nathaniel's thoughts were heavy with everything that had unfolded at Willow Creek House. He parked his car and took a deep breath before stepping inside. The scent of freshly baked bread greeted him, Mrs. Bailey's way of comforting the house after a long day. She appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Welcome back," she said softly, her eyes searching his face. "How did it go?" Nathaniel gave her a tired but grateful smile. "It is over. The children are safe, and Victoria is in custody." Mrs. Bailey sighed in relief. "Thank goodness. Those poor kids." Nathaniel nodded, glancing down the hall. "How are Lily and Ethan?" Mrs. Bailey smiled gently. "Ethan is asleep. Lily has been asking for you all afternoon." Nathaniel's heart softened. "Thank you for watching them. I cannot tell you how much it means." Mrs. Bailey gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Any time. Now go check on them. I will clean up." Nathaniel walked down the hallway and pushed the door open quietly. Lily was sitting on the bed, cross-legged, with a book resting in her lap. She looked up as soon as she saw him, her face lighting up with a mixture of relief and curiosity. "Mr. Nathaniel!" she exclaimed, closing the book and hopping off the bed. Nathaniel knelt as she rushed into his arms, wrapping her small frame around him tightly. He hugged her back, feeling the weight of her trust in that single gesture. Did it work?" she whispered against his shoulder. Nathaniel pulled back slightly so he could look into her eyes. Yes, Lily, it worked. Ms. Victoria is gone. She cannot hurt anyone anymore. Lily's lower lip trembled, but she nodded. The other kids? Are they okay? Nathaniel smiled gently. Yes, they are safe now, just like you and Ethan. Lily took a deep breath, as though she had been holding it for far too long. Thank you, she whispered. Nathaniel's chest tightened with emotion. You are very brave, Lily. You and Ethan. You deserve to feel safe. Lily gave him a small but sincere smile before climbing back onto the bed. Nathaniel sat beside her as she opened the book again. Will you read to me? She asked, her voice soft but hopeful. Nathaniel smiled. Of course. He took the book from her hands and began reading aloud. The story was simple, about a little bird who was learning to fly. But as the words flowed, Nathaniel found himself thinking about how much Lily had endured, and how, despite everything, she had kept her spirit intact. By the time he finished the story, Lily's eyes were drooping with sleep. Nathaniel carefully tucked the blanket around her and whispered, "Good night, Lily." She murmured a soft, "Good night," before drifting off. Nathaniel stood and walked to the crib, where Ethan was sound asleep, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. Nathaniel gently placed a hand on the crib's edge, his heart full. For the first time in a long while, his home felt complete. The next morning, the house was filled with quiet energy. Nathaniel made pancakes, surprising Lily and Mrs. Bailey with his efforts. Lily's giggles filled the air as she watched him flip the pancakes with dramatic flair. Are you sure you are not a professional chef? Mrs. Bailey teased, setting the table. Nathaniel chuckled. Not even close. Lily's eyes lit up as she bit into the first pancake. These are so good. Nathaniel smiled at the sight of her happiness. It was a reminder that joy could be found in the simplest things. After breakfast, Mrs. Bailey took Ethan outside for some fresh air, while Nathaniel and Lily sat together in the living room. Mr. Nathaniel, Lily began hesitantly, what happens now? Nathaniel set his coffee down and turned to face her. That is a good question. The police are making sure everything at Willow Creek House is handled. The children will be placed with families who will care for them. Lily's eyes were thoughtful as she nodded. And us? Nathaniel paused, feeling the gravity of her question. You and Ethan will stay with me, he said gently, as long as you want, and, if you are comfortable with it, I would like to make this your home for good. Lily blinked, her expression unreadable at first. Then, slowly, her face softened, and her small hand reached for his. You really mean it? She whispered. Nathaniel's voice was steady as he replied, I do. I would be honored to be your family. Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but she smiled, small and fragile, but filled with hope. I would like that, she whispered. Nathaniel felt his chest swell with emotion. He pulled her into a gentle hug, holding her close. Then it is settled, he murmured. We are a family. The days that followed were filled with moments of healing. Nathaniel took Lily and Ethan to the park, watched movies with them on rainy afternoons, and slowly introduced them to neighbors who welcomed them warmly. But there were also moments of silence, memories that crept up when least expected. Nathaniel noticed how Lily would freeze at sudden loud noises, or how she would check on Ethan multiple times a night to make sure he was still there. He knew healing would take time, but he was patient. He had promised to stand by them, and he would not break that promise. One afternoon, Thomas Gray stopped by the house, his expression lighter than usual. Nathaniel invited him in and poured him a cup of coffee. Thomas raised his mug in a quiet salute. Victoria Rhodes and her accomplices have been charged. It is done. Nathaniel nodded, relief flooding him. It is finally over. Thomas smiled, but his eyes softened as he looked toward the hallway, where Lily's laughter drifted in. You changed their lives, Nathaniel. And I think they changed yours, too. Nathaniel smiled, his heart full. They did, in ways I never expected. Thomas stood and clapped Nathaniel on the shoulder. "Enjoy this, my friend. You deserve it." Nathaniel walked him to the door, feeling the weight of everything finally lifting. As the sun set that evening, Nathaniel, Lily, and Ethan sat on the porch, watching the sky fade from gold to deep purple. Lily rested her head on Nathaniel's shoulder. "Do you think the other kids will be okay?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel wrapped his arm around her. "I do," he replied. "And if they ever need help, we will be here for them." Lily nodded, a peaceful expression on her face. "Okay." The stars began to appear, one by one, lighting up the sky. Nathaniel felt a deep sense of peace. His life had taken a turn he never could have predicted, but he knew now that it had led him exactly where he was meant to be. The early morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting a soft glow over the room. Nathaniel was at the stove, flipping scrambled eggs as the smell of toast filled the air. Lily sat at the kitchen table, humming quietly as she drew on a piece of paper with a set of crayons. Ethan was babbling in his high chair, happily smearing applesauce across the tray. For the first time in weeks, there was a calmness in the air, simple, ordinary, but precious. Nathaniel paused for a moment, soaking it all in. "Are you making your famous pancakes again?" Lily asked with a playful smile. Nathaniel laughed. "Not today. We cannot live on pancakes alone, but I promise I will make them this weekend." Lily giggled and went back to her drawing. Nathaniel brought the plates to the table and sat down. "What are you working on?" he asked as he set a small bowl of eggs in front of Ethan. Lily turned the paper toward him. It was a crayon drawing of their house, with colorful stick figures of her, Ethan, and Nathaniel standing in front of it. Above them, she had drawn a bright blue sky with a glowing yellow sun. Nathaniel felt his heart tighten as he looked at it. "This is beautiful, Lily." She beamed. "It is our home." Nathaniel swallowed hard, trying to keep his emotions in check. "Yes, it is." After breakfast, Nathaniel decided it was time to start a new tradition. "How would you like to visit the farmer's market today?" he asked. Lily's eyes lit up. "Really?" "Really," Nathaniel confirmed with a smile. "There is a stand that sells fresh lemonade and strawberries. I think you will love it," Ethan squealed, sensing the excitement in the room. The farmer's market was bustling with life. The scent of fresh bread and flowers drifted through the air, and the sound of musicians playing soft acoustic melodies filled the space. Nathaniel held Ethan in one arm, while Lily held his other hand tightly, her eyes wide as she took everything in. "Look at all the flowers!" Lily exclaimed, pointing to a colorful stand filled with daisies, roses, and sunflowers. Nathaniel smiled. "Would you like to pick some out for the house?" Lily nodded eagerly. Together, they chose a small bouquet of daisies and lavender. As they moved from stall to stall, Lily's laughter filled the air, a sound Nathaniel was coming to treasure. At the lemonade stand they sat on a wooden bench, sipping their drinks, while Ethan gnawed on a piece of bread. Nathaniel watched Lily as she talked about the other kids at the orphanage, ones she had barely mentioned before. "I hope they are happy now," she said softly, staring at her cup. "I hope they feel safe." Nathaniel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I think they will be. And if they ever need us, we will be here for them." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe one day, we can visit them." Nathaniel's heart swelled with pride at her kindness. "I think that is a wonderful idea." Back home, the house felt warmer somehow, filled with memories in the making. Nathaniel placed the bouquet in a vase on the dining table. The soft lavender scent drifted through the room, a symbol of something new. Lily settled on the couch with a book while Nathaniel tidied up. As he straightened the living room, his phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up and saw Thomas Gray's name. "Thomas," Nathaniel answered. "How are things?" Thomas's voice was calm but serious. Everything with the case is moving forward. Victoria Rhodes is facing multiple charges, and the evidence from Willow Creek House was enough to ensure she will not walk free. Nathaniel exhaled, relief washing over him. That is good to hear. There is one more thing, Thomas added. The city is putting together a community event to recognize the people who helped bring this to light. I think you and Lily should be there. Nathaniel hesitated. I do not need recognition, Thomas. It is not about recognition, Thomas said gently. It is about showing Lily and the other kids that they were heard, that their stories mattered. Nathaniel glanced toward Lily, who was now reading aloud to Ethan in her soft, sweet voice. We will be there, he said finally. The following weekend, the community event was held at a local park. The sky was clear and blue, and rows of tents had been set up with refreshments, music, and activities for children. Nathaniel and Lily walked side by side while Ethan clung to Nathaniel's hip, his tiny hand clutching the collar of Nathaniel's shirt. Lily looked around nervously at the crowd, but relaxed when she saw a familiar face. One of the social workers who had helped the children was waving to her with a kind smile. Thomas greeted them near the stage, dressed in his formal uniform. He knelt down to Lily's level. Hey there, Lily. How are you doing? Lily gave a small smile. I am okay. Thomas reached into his pocket and handed her a small pin shaped like a star. This is for bravery, he said. Because you were brave when it mattered most. Lily's eyes widened as she took the pin in her small hands. Thank you, she whispered. Nathaniel felt a lump in his throat as he watched her. The event went on with speeches and music. When it was time for Thomas to speak, he stepped onto the small stage and began addressing the crowd. He spoke about the importance of protecting the vulnerable and standing up for what was right. Nathaniel listened quietly, feeling a deep sense of pride not for himself, but for Lily and every child who had endured so much and had come out stronger. When the event ended, they stayed a little longer, enjoying the fresh air and watching Ethan toddle around on the grass. Lily sat on the picnic blanket beside Nathaniel, the star-shaped pin glinting in the sunlight. I like it here, she said, resting her head against his arm. Nathaniel smiled. Me too. As the day turned into evening, they packed up and headed home, their hearts lighter than they had been in a long time. That night, after Lily and Ethan were asleep, Nathaniel sat on the porch with a mug of tea, watching the stars. The quiet hum of the neighborhood settled around him, and for the first time in years, he felt at peace. His life had changed in ways he never could have predicted. What had begun as a quiet, solitary existence had grown into something rich and full, a home filled with love, laughter, and purpose. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth it. And as he sat there beneath the endless sky, Nathaniel knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The morning was quiet, filled with the soft sound of birds chirping outside the windows. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen table as Nathaniel poured himself a cup of coffee. The house felt warm in a way it never had before, alive with small sounds and movement. He glanced at the living room, where Lily and Ethan were building a tower out of blocks. Ethan's squeals of laughter echoed as the tower toppled over, and Lily giggled, setting the blocks back up again. Nathaniel leaned against the counter, watching them with a quiet smile. Are you ready for today? Mrs. Bailey's voice called from the doorway as she stepped inside, holding a basket of muffins. Nathaniel nodded. As ready as I will ever be. Today was a big day. The final court hearing for Lily and Ethan's adoption was scheduled for the afternoon. It was the last step in making everything official, but for Nathaniel, it was more than just paperwork. It was a declaration of something he already knew in his heart. They were a family. Lily looked up from the blocks and walked over to him. Are we really going to court today? She asked quietly. Nathaniel knelt in front of her, resting a hand on her shoulder. Yes, we are. And by the end of today, everything will be official. He paused, his gaze steady. But it has always been real, Lily. No paper can change that. Lily's eyes shimmered with emotion as she nodded. Okay. The courthouse was calm, with muted voices and the quiet shuffle of papers filling the halls. Nathaniel held Ethan on his hip and walked hand in hand with Lily toward the courtroom. Thomas Gray was waiting for them outside, dressed in a sharp suit instead of his usual uniform. He smiled warmly as they approached. "You all set?" Thomas asked. Nathaniel nodded. "I think so." Thomas bent down to Lily's level and offered her a reassuring smile. "You are going to do great in there." Lily managed a small but brave smile. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was formal but not unkind. The judge was an older woman with a kind face and gentle eyes. Nathaniel could feel Lily's hand tighten around his as they sat down at the front. Ethan shifted in Nathaniel's arms, fascinated by the high ceilings and the soft echo of footsteps. The judge began by reviewing the case file. She spoke softly, but with authority. "Mr. Nathaniel Parker, you have filed for permanent guardianship and adoption of Lily and Ethan Reynolds. Is that correct?" Nathaniel straightened his back. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge studied him over her glasses. "And do you understand the responsibility you are taking on?" Nathaniel met her gaze without hesitation. "I do. I want them to have a home, a safe, stable home, where they can grow up knowing they are loved." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Lily, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle as she addressed the young girl, "would you like to say anything?" Lily blinked up at the judge, unsure at first. She glanced at Nathaniel, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. She stood, her small hands clutching the edge of her dress nervously. I want to stay with Mr. Nathaniel," she said quietly. "He makes us pancakes, and he reads to us, and he keeps Ethan safe." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "We have a home now, and I do not want to leave." The judge smiled softly. "Thank you, Lily." Lily sat back down, and Nathaniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. After reviewing a few more documents, the judge took a deep breath. "It is clear to me that this is where these children belong." Effective immediately, the court grants the adoption petition. Lily and Ethan are officially members of the Parker family. Nathaniel felt the weight of the judge's words settle over him like sunlight breaking through clouds. He exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and joy filling his chest. Lily turned to him, her eyes wide. "Does this mean we are really a family now?" Nathaniel's voice was thick with emotion as he replied, "Yes, Lily, we are." Tears shimmered in her eyes as she wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on tightly. Ethan, sensing the joy around him, clapped his hands, giggling. Thomas watched from the side with a proud smile. The ride home was filled with laughter. Lily sat in the back seat, chatting about what she wanted to do now that everything was official. "Can we get a swing set for the backyard?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. Nathaniel chuckled. "I think we can make that happen." When they arrived home, Mrs. Bailey was waiting on the porch with balloons and a welcome home sign. She hugged them tightly as they stepped out of the car. "You did it," she whispered to Nathaniel. "Congratulations." Inside, the dining table was decorated with flowers, plates of cookies, and a small cake. It was simple, but perfect. They sat together, laughing and talking, savoring the sweetness of the moment. Lily leaned against Nathaniel's arm as she enjoyed her second cookie. "I never thought we would have this," she murmured. Nathaniel looked down at her, his heart full. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But now we do, and we will make the most of it, every day." The weeks that followed were filled with new beginnings. Nathaniel installed a swing set in the backyard, and he and Lily spent afternoons pushing Ethan in the baby swing, while Lily soared high into the sky, her laughter ringing through the air. They visited the library, went on picnics, and built pillow forts on rainy days. Slowly but surely, their little family settled into a rhythm of love and normalcy. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Nathaniel sat on the back porch with Lily and Ethan, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. Lily rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you think Mama would be happy?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel wrapped his arm around her and spoke softly. "I think she would be very proud of you. You took care of Ethan when it was hard, and you kept hope alive. That is something special, Lily." Lily nodded, a peaceful look on her face. Nathaniel glanced at Ethan, who was curled up in his lap, fast asleep. He felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had not planned for his life to change so drastically, but he would not trade it for anything. The past had shaped them, but it did not define them. What mattered now was the future they were building together, a future filled with resilience, laughter, and love. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Nathaniel felt a quiet sense of certainty. They were not just surviving anymore, they were living, and no matter what came next, they would face it as a family. Lily reached up and pointed at the sky. "There is the first star," she whispered. Nathaniel smiled. "Make a wish." Lily closed her eyes for a moment before opening them again, her expression full of quiet wonder. "What did you wish for?" Nathaniel asked. Lily leaned closer and whispered, "I did not have to wish for anything. I already have everything I wanted." Nathaniel hugged her close, his heart overflowing with joy. "Me too," he whispered. And as they sat together beneath the vast night sky, their hearts full of hope and love, Nathaniel knew that this was only the beginning of their story. Nathaniel, Lily, and Ethan's story is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope. Through courage, resilience, and kindness, they found their way to a brighter future. Their journey shows that family is not just about where you come from. It is about who stands by you when the world feels uncertain. This is only the beginning of their beautiful life together, built on love, trust, and the simple joys that make life meaningful. No matter where life takes them, they know they will always face it together, as a family. If you were moved by this story, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who loves inspiring stories, and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt content. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful stories of resilience, hope, and kindness. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us. And remember, no matter where you are or what you are going through, you are never truly alone. We are always here to share stories that remind you of the strength within you. Thank you for watching.